The New York Knicks have been suspiciously quiet this offseason. For a team that had a really nice year last year, made some really good moves in free agency last offseason, they've been pretty tame in terms of their big time moves. What's the next step for New York? And to me, that makes me think that there's a bigger master plan happening here. So to really understand this, we have to look back at the moves and the actions of the New York Knicks over the last couple of seasons, because they've had some up and down years where they make the playoffs some years, others they're a little bit more disappointing, but now they found themselves in, I would argue, the most competent organizational position that they have been in basically since they were occasionally making the playoffs with Carmelo. Like, this is the best version of the Knicks that we've seen in a long time, and maybe has an opportunity to have a sustained stretch and run of success, which is why it's so interesting that they're not as active as maybe you'd expect them to be at acquiring star players. Really quickly though, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, Raid Shadow Legends. For over 4 years now, today's video sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends, has created champions and bosses to blow your mind. There are super detailed and tactical RPG systems, incredible graphics, and intense combination of PvE and PvP content. There are over 700 plus unique champions, 15 awesome factions, and 12 imposing dungeons to conquer, and that's just the start to this conversation. No wonder there are over 400 million players from over 190 countries roaming the world of Raid, playing for free on desktop, Android, and iOS. The PvP combat keeps you wanting more. Take on the world of Classic Tag Team and the newly added Live Arena. Rise up the ranks and battle against players from all around the world in all 3 exciting PvP modes. You will never get bored with your champion. The customization is endless with millions of different artifact combinations, team compositions, and practically infinite ways to play. Tweak your champion and create a team of unbeatable warriors that's completely unique to you. If those examples aren't enough, the Call of the Arbiter is in full swing now. Raid is adding some of the new characters. The first one is Artak, a mighty orc warlord. And he is free when you log into Raid for 7 days between now and July 24th. You're definitely going to want this guy. With all this exciting stuff and more coming to Raid, if you haven't started playing yet, what are you waiting for? Use my link in the description or scan my QR code to get insane bonuses. We're talking an epic champion knight errant from the Bannerlords faction and other useful things like energy refills, skill tome, and XP booster. Remember to hit my link in the description and I'll see you on the battlefield. Now, I'm sure there are Knicks fans watching this video thinking, well, the star players thing has never really worked out for us, so why would we continue to go back to that? Let's explore other ways to build the team, which is why last offseason they brought in Jalen Brunson, who was very good for them, which is why they haven't traded RJ Barrett as a young player, which is why they haven't traded Julius Randle, who, although he is frustrating as a player, has had all-star level play and production since he's been in New York. That's the reason why, Tucker. That's why they haven't gone after the star thing. I'm here to present a bit of a different perspective on that, because I think they're waiting for specific situations, for specific circumstances. What makes me think that is they've had opportunities where they could have gone out and gotten their main star guy in New York. Last offseason, it was Donovan Mitchell. They would have done RJ Barrett and I believe 2 firsts, but they wouldn't throw in another first-round pick, and ultimately that's why Mitchell ended up going to Cleveland rather than New York. That situation specifically is interesting because I think maybe they're expecting Donovan Mitchell to come to the Knicks eventually in free agency in a couple of seasons, and they didn't feel like they needed to do the Carmelo thing all over again where they trade for a guy that they can just sign in free agency later on. But ultimately, they weren't as aggressive going after Donovan Mitchell as they could have been. Now we've got the Damian Lillard and the James Harden stuff where they're apparently not being all that aggressive in acquiring those guys either. And to me, what that means is they're targeting a couple of specific guys. And I think those 2 players are, one, and most primarily, Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid has a relationship with the New York Knicks. If the Sixers thing ever really goes off the rails with Harden and all these other factors, and Embiid does want to leave, I think the New York Knicks are not only at the top of his list, but the Knicks are going to be waiting around thinking, finally, this is the move that we've been waiting to make with the roster that we've been building. And I think a little bit more of an under the radar one would be Luka as well. This would have to be way down the road. This would have to be a trade, but I think they're waiting for that level of player. Embiid, Luka, those kinds of like legitimately MVP caliber players at this point in their careers. Not Donovan Mitchell, not Damian Lillard, not James Harden, but those 2 guys specifically. However, this is a really interesting situation to me because let's say, for example, that maybe they do want to get Harden, they do want to get Lillard, they did want to get Mitchell last offseason and they just got outbid. The way that their team is constructed, especially if they had to move out pieces in a trade for one of those guards, it doesn't really work for any of those guys. I mean, Mitchell maybe, but like Lillard, Harden, alongside Jalen Brunson, that just doesn't make a ton of sense. And the Brunson move last offseason was fantastic. I'll be the first person to admit I made a mistake on that. I got that wrong. I thought it was too much money for Jalen Brunson. I thought it was a contract that wasn't worth it. I thought that was definitely an overpay. play, and he was unbelievable for them. I mean, borderline all-star caliber player, just incredible levels of production, especially in the postseason, and someone finally at the end of games that Knicks fans can trust. And all those things are great, but when you try and put him alongside a Lillard or a Harden or maybe even a Mitchell, defensively, obviously there's issues there, but also you're dealing with kind of redundant offensive players, guys that are a little bit smaller, guys that need the ball to really be super effective. And that kind of dynamic makes me hesitant to think that the Harden, Dame, or last offseason Mitchell thing was ever really going to happen for them, which again leads me to this opinion that I have that I think they're waiting for specific players. They're waiting for Luka, they're waiting for Embiid, and whether those guys happen or not, they're looking at this in a much more sustainable, long-term team-building way, which is pretty refreshing for the Knicks, if I'm honest. Now, the other part of this, you might argue, is that the Knicks' assets are actually maybe not as good as you would think. I mean, essentially, if they were going to make a trade, for Harden or Lillard or down the road Embiid or Luka, it would be you pick one of the lefties. You pick RJ Barrett, you pick Julius Randle. You can have one of those guys. We'll throw some salaries in there, Evan Fournier, whatever the case may be. Obviously, we've got some younger players quickly, some of those guys that, are relatively important to the roster. And then they've got picks. And they've got a decent number of first-round picks. They have all of their own. They have some other teams' firsts as well, but they're not that great. They aren't like really, really good first round picks. Most of them are either going to be in the 20s or like fake firsts that are just going to convey as multiple seconds down the road. And so maybe that's your argument there. That's why they didn't do Mitchell. That's why they haven't to this point been very interested in Dame or Harden, is because they just don't have the assets to make that happen. My issue with that is I think they could have gotten Donovan Mitchell last offseason. If they had put in another first round pick, I think Cleveland would have taken RJ Barrett and 3 firsts over the package that they got from Cleveland. Now, obviously, that's worked out fantastically for them, not only because of the draft compensation, but because Lauri Markkanen became an all-star player, which like nobody expected. And RJ Barrett's good. I don't think he would have been an all-star last year for Utah. And so it worked out really well for them. But in the moment, the Knicks trade package, if they put in an extra first or an extra swap or whatever Utah was asking for, I think that would have put them over the top and they could have had Mitchell. So they either had concerns about the fit between Mitchell or Brunson, or they thought they could just get Mitchell a couple years from now, or they're just waiting for one of these big time players. Now, the problem with this mindset, although it does make sense in terms of long-term team building, is let's say it's 2 years from now and Joel Embiid's like, you know what, it was fun, Philly, but I'm out. Now you're looking at an early 30s big guy that's had all these lower body injury issues throughout his career, that's never been incredibly durable, that's just a huge guy. And those guys don't age particularly well. It's something that we've seen throughout the history of the NBA. So now you're trading for, or I guess potentially signing in free agency, a guy in Embiid that, yes, was the MVP of the league this most recent season. But when he hits that cliff, when he drops off, it's going to happen fast. And you're really risking a lot by waiting around for that guy, as well as going to get him once he kind of reaches that early 30s part of his career. That to me is the big concern, is what if you wait and then you get a guy that's hurt? Or in Luka's case, what if you wait and then you never actually get that player? So what I think is happening here is a combination of all these factors. Fit alongside Brunson, not wanting to give up a ton in exchange, waiting for some of the bigger guys. But I think what this might all be leading to is, in a couple of off seasons, the New York Knicks signing Donovan Mitchell. The Cavaliers' first season with Mitchell went really well in the regular season, but went about as poorly as you could hope for in the postseason, specifically against this Knicks team, ironically. And I think there's already some rumors and some rumblings and some concerns there in Cleveland that Donovan Mitchell could be looking elsewhere. And if he doesn't sign that extension, a year from now, we might be looking at another Donovan Mitchell trade, or he could just leave in free agency, and maybe that's what the Knicks are counting on. Obviously, Cleveland is really trying to add to their roster and improve, especially on the wings. They brought in multiple wings that can shoot. But the Mitchell thing, I think, is already a concern in Cleveland. And that's probably plan A right now for New York, just because the Embiid thing doesn't feel super realistic, as, in terms of him asking out of Philadelphia. And then Luka, that's just so much further down the road. But I definitely think that overall in the front office there in New York, in terms of their decision making over the last couple of seasons, I definitely think they're up to something.